Good afternoon, everybody. James Detroit here. Current events, historical perspective, and obviously I am taking a break out of a busy day on the road. Get a chance to look at the Epoch Times. I encourage you to do the same at some point, but let me just share with you the 4-year-long war on Trump. Efforts to undermine the president haven't stopped since 2016, and some would argue from the time he came down the escalator. The post-election push to force President Donald Trump to concede, despite recounts and ongoing litigation amid credible allegations of voter fraud, is not an isolated incident. It is the accumulation of a 4-year-long campaign against him, which started during his first run for president in 2016 when the FBI launched a politically motivated investigation of his campaign. During his subsequent 4 years in office, there have been consistent efforts to remove him from office, first through the Russia collusion narrative and then through impeachment. The Epoch Times here provides an overview of some of the main efforts against the sitting president of the United States. This is an issue that transcends party lines, as it is not only an assault on Trump, but an assault on the office of the presidency, and with it, an assault on the foundation of America. Communist forces, both international and domestic, have joined forces to oust this president, who they see as a main obstacle to achieving their objective of installing socialism and ultimately communism in the United States. So they've put together a timeline, and I'm going to read it over. I forgot to turn off my ringer, so if we get disturbed by a phone call, so be it. I'll push that to voicemail and continue. The permanent government. Though Trump, as president, is the leader of the executive branch, when he came to office, he inherited a federal government staffed with hundreds of thousands of employees. It's no secret that many career officials in the U.S. government have actively sought to undermine or even openly work against Trump. Many in government have been led by false information published by media organizations to believe that they are doing the right thing, and that by working against Trump, they are putting the interests of the country first. In fact, they have done the country a disservice by blocking a rightfully elected president from executing the will of the people. Black Lives Matter. BLM has been behind the riots that have plagued American cities for much of this year. The group has hijacked the concerns people have over racism and used them to justify its advance of a radical Marxist agenda. In a 2015 video, BLM co-founder Patrisse Cullors described herself and her fellow members as trained Marxists. Just like in Russia, China, Cuba, Venezuela, trained Marxists have hijacked righteous causes to advance the communist agenda. Many of those who lived through the Cultural Revolution in China in the 1960s have commented that the riots in the United States of the summer, which included the toppling of historic statues, were eerily similar. The result is a climate of chaos and insecurity that affects the entire country. Politically motivated investigation. The FBI under Obama administration in 2016 launched a politically motivated investigation of the Trump campaign based on publicly available information. We know the investigation was initiated based on the thinnest of evidence, remarks made by a junior Trump campaign advisor to the Australian ambassador in London. In reality, the investigation primarily relied on the discredited Steele dossier produced by former MI6 agent Christopher Steele on behalf of the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Party. The media. Perhaps one of the most powerful forces working against Trump during his presidency has been the news media. Over the past 5 years, they have relentlessly published skewed and inaccurate information about Trump while minimizing or ignoring his accomplishments, seeking to portray him publicly as an illegitimate president. This type of reporting has created a climate of anger, hate, and instability in America. It has resulted in threats made to the president's life and acts of violence against his supporters. The FBI under Comey and McCabe. James Comey and Deputy Director Andrew McCabe proactively worked against Trump. McCabe was directly involved in Crossfire hurricane investigation, working with FBI agent Peter Strzok and FBI attorney Lisa Page. After Comey was fired by Trump in May of 2017, McCabe actively pushed the agency to further investigate Trump. McCabe's FBI went as far as suggesting Department of Justice official Bruce Orr reach back out to Steele, despite that many of the claims in his dossier had been disproven by that time, and the FBI had cut ties with him over his leaks to the media. The Trump-Russia shadow. While the FBI's Crossfire Hurricane investigation itself would not find any evidence of Trump, I'll read that one more time. While the FBI's Crossfire Hurricane investigation itself would not find any evidence of Trump, Russia collusion, the ongoing investigation, including selective leaks to the media, would create the public narrative that Trump had colluded with Russia to win the 2016 election. This cast a shadow over the first few years of his presidency and constrained his actions both domestically and internationally. Some members of Congress had gone so far as to call for Trump's impeachment over the false allegations. Throughout the past 4 years, the Trump administration has been plagued by selective leaks aimed at damaging Trump's presidency. Some of these leaks have been criminal in nature, such as the leak of the transcripts of Trump's conversation with foreign leaders, a felony offense. Treasury official Natalie Edwards was found guilty of illegally leaking suspicious activities, that's SARS, on financial transactions by former Trump campaign associates Paul Manafort, among others. And let me just say, Paul Manafort, they threw that guy on discovery crimes, may or may not have evaded taxes. Regardless, on discovery crimes, solitary confinement, that's 23 hours a day. You get 1 hour outside of that cell, 23 hours a day, in hopes that he would create something and make something up so he could get out of that cell. I believe Paul Manafort to be a solid individual, not a rat, not making something up to try to benefit himself, a truth teller. To some extent, obviously, if he did indeed evade taxes, well, how about AOC and anybody else in Congress that needs to be held to the same criteria? Mueller special counsel investigation. Following the firing of FBI Director Comey, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein assigned former FBI Director Robert Mueller to continue the FBI's investigation of the alleged Trump-Russia collusion. Mueller would conclude in a final report that there was no evidence of such collusion, but this only came after a nearly 2-year-long investigation, giving the media and Trump political opponents leeway to portray Trump as an illegitimate president because of his supposed affiliation with Russia. And I think somewhere around $35 or $40 million, all of that time wasted. And this was a special counsel that had 18 partisan hacks on their law team, and they couldn't make something up in order to get it to stick. Antifa, dressed in full black gear, including armor, helmets, and masks, and trained in agitation and basic combat. Antifa extremists have been involved in numerous acts of violence during Trump's presidency. In many cases, these acts of violence, which include the use of weapons, rocks, Molotov cocktails, were directed at law enforcement and government property. But Antifa members have also directly targeted unarmed common citizens for simply supporting Trump. We saw this happen twice in Washington, where those who gathered to support Trump were later attacked when alone in the city at night. Antifa's use of militia-style force to intimidate and physically attack citizens for their political beliefs creates a powerful climate of fear and stands against the most basic American values. And when you arrest people for surfing alone or being out past a curfew time, you'll arrest those people, but you let these people go. You do not prosecute these people. I've seen way too many police vehicles burning in the streets of our cities this year. Shame on anybody that would support that. Foreign interference. It would be accurate to say that the Trump is communist China's biggest adversary. The president broke a decades-long U.S. policy toward China that was based on the belief that through engagement in economic development, the People's Republic would evolve from a totalitarian regime toward a more democratic country. In reality, this strategy of appeasement merely resulted in trillions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of U.S. jobs going to China. And instead of becoming more democratic, the Chinese regime used this wealth to advance its dictatorship, creating the most technologically advanced tyranny the world has ever witnessed. The CCP, that's the Chinese Communist Party, has consistently worked against Trump during his presidency, both publicly and behind the scenes. Beijing has used its domestic and overseas propaganda channels, often by relying on the United States' own media, to vilify Trump, going as far as to suggest that the outbreak of the CCP virus in Wuhan was because of the American military. And I will also add that appeasement has never worked. It did not work for Chamberlain against Hitler, and it will not work here. And yet that is suggested by a 75, 78 million vote total, that what a slight majority of our country wants to go back to is an appeasement policy and business as usual. America is back and you get to pay to play all you want, keep taking money out of our pockets and putting it to the global elite. No, the only thing standing in the way of that is Donald Trump and patriots in this country. Impeachment. The House of Representatives on December 18th, 2019, impeached Trump along partisan lines. And if you remember the little walk with the pens, taking it from one house to the other chamber, and Nancy Pelosi handing these things out, what a disgusting episode in our history. Though the Senate would later dismiss the charge, it left a mark on his presidency and dragged the country through months of public attacks in the media. At the center of the impeachment was a phone call Trump made on July 25th, 2019 to Ukrainian President Zelensky, during which Trump expressed his hope that allegations of potential corruptions involving former Vice President Joe Biden would be investigated. Given even the publicly available information at the time, there were legitimate concerns that American political influence and taxpayer funds were used in Ukraine. At the time, it was publicly known that Biden's son Hunter had received tens of thousands of dollars a month from Ukrainian energy giant, while then Vice President Biden, in his own words, had pressured the Ukrainian president to fire a prosecutor as a prerequisite for receiving $1 billion in foreign aid. That same prosecutor had been investigating Ukrainian energy company Burisma, as well as its board, which included Hunter Biden. That is the crime right there. And Joe Biden publicly boasted about having his influence and holding our taxpayer dollars from going someplace it was supposed to go, as long as his son and that board was still being investigated. Shame on all of us for letting this happen. We need to be stronger. The CCP virus, the Chinese Communist Party virus. Trump's opponents have accused the president of mishandling the CCP virus, commonly referred to as the novel coronavirus, by acting too late. This, however, is contrary to the events of early 2020. The Trump administration on February 2, 2020, banned all foreign travel from China, the source of the CCP virus. The decision was made by the president against the advice of some of his top advisors and exceeded action taken by most other nations at the time. Meanwhile, his opponents in politics and media described it as xenophobic and an overreaction. In hindsight, the decision proved immensely valuable in helping to slow the spread of the virus. As the virus spread in the United States, the Trump administration increased testing capacity, coordinated with state governments to provide them with federal assistance they needed, used the Defense Production Act to compel companies to produce critical health equipment, such as ventilators, and provided billions in federal funding and eased federal regulations for major drug companies to push for the development of a vaccine. And I'll be on the other side of contact tracing forever, of anybody that thinks contact tracing is a good idea. I will also remind everybody that once the virus is on the shore, it doesn't matter now. Herd immunity is not a strategy. It's a scientific fact. As well as, if you look at the box that the surgical masks come in, it says right on it, it does not stop COVID-19. Especially, all you care about to make yourself feel better is whether or not I'm wearing one at Meijer and you've got your homemade handkerchief, your face diaper. Stop, please. Stop trying to shame me. You can't do it. Manufactured narratives. The use of manufactured narratives to attack Trump has been pervasive since he assumed the presidency. Perhaps the most notable is the claim that he defended neo-Nazis in Charlottesville, Virginia, when in fact he said that there were, quote unquote, very fine people on both sides, referring to people as were there to protest the taking down of, to them, a very important statue and the renaming of a park from Robert E. Lee to another name, end quote. Trump specifically added, quote, I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, end quote. Yet despite this being on public record, the whole quote, in full context, despite this being in public record, Trump would continue to be asked throughout his presidency, especially during the election season, whether he was ready to denounce white supremacy, which he did all along, every single time, and he was proactive in doing that, despite having done so on many occasions, even before becoming president. 2020 election fraud, and that brings us to the point at where we're at today. Following the November 3rd elections, dozens of credible allegations of voter fraud or other illegal acts connected to the counting of ballots have emerged. Dozens of poll workers across multiple states have given testimony and sworn statements under penalty of perjury detailing irregularities in how ballots were counted, as well as how the workers were instructed to make otherwise illegal changes to ballots, how they were unable to properly observe ballot counting, and how they witnessed new ballots mysteriously appear out of nowhere. The Trump campaign and the Republican National Committee launched a number of lawsuits to challenge the process. They've argued that in Pennsylvania alone, 600,000 plus ballots should be invalidated, as Republican election observers weren't allowed to witness the ballot processing. Let me just say this. When you have, and on the front of this paper, I do see another electoral college map, which does show the 6 states still in question: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada. And the truth, and that is that through this electoral process, through the process of electing our president and making sure that enemies, both foreign and domestic, do not have an illegitimate influence on our elections, our electoral vote tally right now, today, stands at 232 to 227 in favor of Donald Trump. It's still a long road ahead of us, but there is hope that springs eternal because we have the Constitution of the United States of America. I am asking that every single person that would watch this video encourage their state reps, their state senators, call them and tell them to do what is constitutionally responsible. They have a duty to this country. For now, I'm James Detroit, and I'm out.